Dazzling. So what I'm hoping to do today is to talk a bit about assessment. I hope that's what you're expecting. But not just to talk about assessment. See if this works. Right, okay. Oh, thank you, yeah. I'm actually going to try and do some assessment, so a little bit of interactivity, hopefully. And the reason I'm telling you that now is because if you do have a mobile device of some kind, a phone or a tablet or a computer, you might want to set it up. Just go to that site, respond.cc, and then you'll be able to play along, or as we call it, be assessed. I'm interested to know what people know about assessment, what they think about it. So I hope this is going to tell us that. Of course, the technology may not work at all, and because I haven't got access to a keyboard, I'm having to use my beautiful assistant Miles to work that, and you can see we haven't practiced this, so it might just all fail horribly. Technology. Okay, so why am I talking about this? Well, it was prompted by reading that book, David and Nick's book, which I'm sure people have read. All of you read this yet? It's available from good bookshops, probably available here, I'm guessing. And I was sent a copy to read because I wrote the foreword to it. And I thought the whole book was great. I read the bit on assessment and I thought, hasn't quite nailed some of the things that I would want to say about assessment. And I said that to David and Nick, and they responded in quite appropriately, I think, to some of my specific comments. But it got me thinking, what would I want to say about assessment that wasn't in there? And in the background here also, you can see that in Durham we teach an MSc program in educational assessment. We've been doing that for about 10 years now. We also, in the background there are things like the Carter initial teacher training inquiry, and of course the assessing, what's it called? Commission on Assessment Without Levels. I was part of that. And all of those things are saying that we need more teachers to know more about assessment in order to be well placed to do their jobs, which I think is true. So I'm going to try and make the case for that. Why? And then the other thing that's going on here is that we've now started we're developing, or have developed, certainly a pilot version of a program of training in assessment for teachers. So it's not the theoretical stuff that you get if you signed up for the MSc, or at least it's a version of that, but it's very much an applied version, and it's the version of it that teachers need to know in order to lead on assessment within their schools, to do good assessment and to be a resource within their school or their alliance or whatever it might be, to help other schools, help other teachers to do good assessment. What do teachers need to know? Okay, well, and this is Assessment Academy, and you can go to that website if you search for that. We're running some pilots this year with some schools in the northeast, and then we hope that that'll be a program that we can make available to across the country, if not the world, by next year. And if people are interested in that, I'm very much keen to get details from you. You can sign up on this page or have a conversation about what would be useful. It'll be a substantial program of learning, 4 days we're thinking, 4 days of face-to-face time with a whole lot of activities as well. And Stuart Keim, who's my colleague in Durham, who's leading on developing this, is also the brains behind this evidence-based education organisation. And he's doing a session, couple of sessions' time, talking about very much the same kind of stuff. So if you haven't had enough when you've listened to me, then go and listen to him as well. Okay, what do teachers need to know? Well, a whole lot of stuff, and I'm just going to talk about two things, I think, reliability and validity, and I probably won't even manage to talk about those. But they're quite sort of dry, abstract, theoretical. Why do they matter to teachers? Okay, well, let's see if I can persuade you of that. So, reliability. And this is my first set of questions. So, this is the point where you go to respond.cc, and you should see a page that says enter your session key, and then the session key is the one that's up there, 418941. So you type that number in, click continue, and then you're playing. And as you do that, you work through those questions, your answers, we'll see on the screen who thinks what for each of those questions. So this is just a set of questions about what does reliability actually mean? Which of these things are part of reliability? Okay, I'll give you a few minutes just to play with that if you want to, or just to sit and think deeply if you don't. Okay, right, let's have a look at some of these answers. So that's question 1. Is this part of reliability? Replicability, the ability to do a test once and do it again and get the same result? Yeah, absolutely it is. That's the classic part of reliability. So I think 80% of you I agree with on that. Precision, how accurate is a score? Is the same thing. That is also part of reliability. So I agree with 60% of you on that. Next one. Independence of item selection. If you've ever calculated Cronbach's alpha, which is one of the sort of default simple statistics that you calculate when you're analysing a test, that is essentially this. To what extent are the particular items in that test interchangeable? If I put different items in, would the score change? So, yes, this absolutely is part of reliability. Okay, I'm getting confused. Which one are we on now? Independence of markers. So again, if you double mark something, 2 markers mark an essay independently, do they agree? That's part of reliability too. Next. And standardization of contexts. So changing anything, this is a catch-all. Change the time of day when you do the assessment, or the colour of the displays on the wall, or what instructions you give, or anything like that you change, is an aspect of reliability. So this set of 5 questions, that's the last one, isn't it? Was a trick, because they're all part of reliability. And it's a trick because when people talk about reliability, they talk about it as if it was one thing, and actually it's about 10 different things. We're using the same word. Well, that's confusing. Clearly, some people here are confused by that too. Okay, now we've got a whole stream of questions about what can you do to a test. If you're writing a test or you're using a test, you're thinking about using a test, what could you do to make it more reliable? And I'll talk in a minute about what will happen if you don't make it reliable, but the immediate question for a practitioner is, what things can I do? So these are all questions like that. Now, I'm asking you to choose between 3 categories, and there aren't really right and wrong here, because yes, provided, well, it depends what you say, provided, or no, unless, again, it really depends what you say, less. So you've got each question. You've also got an opportunity to type a bit of text in to say why. You might feel you don't have time to do that, or you can't be bothered. That's fine. But if you do, if enough people do that, Miles can create a word cloud out of those responses, which will be worth it, won't it? Come on. Right, so I'll just go through quickly then. So question 6, make it less valid. Most people seem to think no to that, and I think that's right. People sometimes talk about a trade-off between reliability and validity, as if you can only get one by having less of the other. But making it less valid doesn't automatically make it more reliable. It might do, it depends how you do it. Can we see the words for that? Anybody? Maybe. It's a bit clunky here how we have to change between the two. It may not be worth it. No, that's the... Forward and then back. Yeah. Oh, now I've done it. Okay, so that... No. No, you've gone back to the other question, I think, Miles. That's question 1. Yeah, it's got to be... You've got to get on to the next question, okay. Question 2. It shouldn't, no. Thank you. I knew this was a bad idea. Okay, try that on the word cloud. Okay, brilliant. So those are all the reasons people gave, those of you that did type anything, for why the answer you gave. Obviously, the reason you gave will depend on the answer you gave, so it's probably not very helpful to look at those. But all right, okay. Just having fun. Right, let's have a look at the next one. Give candidates more time. What do people think about that? Okay, so most people think it depends. I think that's right. It probably does depend. Depends what you use that time for. If you use the time to collect more information, then it probably does increase the reliability. I think we probably haven't got time to go back and forth with all the word clouds. I'll try and make this available in some way if people are interested. Okay. Okay. What about get two markers to mark and take the average? What's the feeling about that? Okay, most people think yes for that. Good. Okay, I think that's right, provided they do it independently. So obviously they have to mark it without seeing what the other one's done. If one is influenced by the other's mark, then that's less likely to achieve that. Next one, more items. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I would have said that was probably one of the clearest yeses, actually. That is interesting, yeah. Does anybody want to argue about that? Or... Yeah. Repeat of what you've got. Yeah. Well, that still might make it more reliable. In fact, one of the ways you get reliability is a sort of replication of similar items. So obviously not identical, but yeah, duplicate in a sense, parallel. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Highlight whether or not there are any misconceptions.
Yes. Well, to make it more reliable, yes, you add more items. Obviously, if you narrow the context of the domain of what you're assessing, that's where the trade-off between reliability and validity might come in. So you might find you haven't assessed the whole construct that you wanted to, and therefore you've made it less valid. But in general, more items, more information in an assessment will make it more reliable. Well, okay. So if you create a 6-hour-long test, then, or even, yes, depending on what kind of children you're talking about, that there might be some fatigue coming in, yes. But there might be other ways you could deal with that. You could break it into 2, for example. Or you could get children with more staying power. That's a joke. Well, that's a good idea. Okay. Keep the number of marks available, but keep the number of items or tasks the same. Okay. People think generally no to that. Well, I think that one depends on what you give those marks for. So if they're genuine marks that genuinely discriminate between distinct levels of performance, then that might achieve higher reliability. But usually we have more marks available than there are genuine levels of, a 20-mark essay question, for example, almost never has 20 distinct levels of performance that could be identified. In fact, it's almost impossible to create an assessment item like an essay or a long question that has more than about 5 distinct levels of performance. So nothing should ever be marked out of 20. 5 is probably an upper limit for human judgment. So I'd say that was a depends one, but probably no. Okay, replace poorly discriminating items with better ones. Good, yeah, absolutely. Agree with that. That's the way to do it. Better, well, the clue's in the word better, isn't it? So it's not a great multiple choice question, that. You don't have to understand anything about the content to make a good guess and get it right. Here's how not to do assessment. Narrow the range of what's assessed. 12. Okay, that's a bit of a split then. Generally, I think that does make things more reliable, but obviously there's a trade-off there with validity. Okay, the next one, limit the range of methods used. So we're not mixing multiple choice and essays or practical and written, we're just sticking to one mode. Okay, I would say that was a yes too. Again, you're making it less valid, but you probably are making it more reliable. So that's where I get another one of those trade-offs. And lastly, use comparative judgment. I know there's some sessions on that today. We've got Daisy and Chris Whedon and people. Okay, I'm coming to that. So thank you. Yes. Hopefully coming to that. Comparative judgment. Yes, okay. If it's done well, comparative judgment can create very reliable measures. Yeah.
Let's go back on the last one.
Yeah.
That's surely true if what you're assessing is the ability to write an essay. And this depends on what valid is. But if you're trying to assess a concept, surely corroborating different approaches to that concept
Is helpful, yes. It's a good thing to do, but it will make it less reliable.
Isn't that the same as adding more? If you add more items,
Yeah.
you're getting a greater variety of individual responses.
Yeah.
You're saying that increases reliability.
Usually, yeah.
But if those items are too dissimilar, then you're saying it's reducing reliability.
Yes. Yeah. But it may be increasing validity. Because you don't just want to know, what you want to know is whether children understand a particular scientific principle, not whether they're good at writing an essay. So if you only use essays to determine that, then what you're measuring is essay writing ability confounded with understanding of the core idea. And therefore, by using a variety of methods, some is spoken, so perhaps some is written, some is short answers, some multiple choice, and so on, then the error that you get, if you like, the bias from using a particular method cancels out because you've used lots of different methods. But you have to collect a lot more data doing that to get the same replicability and precision, which is what reliability is about.
What happens if you just conclude that you have a low level of confidence, you're not sure?
That's very often the state we're in, I think. Yeah. But what's important, I think, so my view is that that's not necessarily a bad thing. What's bad is thinking that it's more accurate than it is.
So what I'm asking is it a reliable conclusion to say that you're not sure?
Yes.
Exactly.
In fact, that's mostly the conclusion that you should come to from most assessment. Yeah. So, in fact, you've summarised the whole talk, really. Thank you. Okay. So, can we go back to the slides then? Okay. So that's just some examples to get a bit of thinking going about reliability. I hope that's done more clarifying than confusing, although I'm not altogether sure that that's the case. But why does it matter? Well, it matters for a whole series of reasons, which I'm going to have to go through a bit quickly, I think. I've got some examples, so let me see if oh, there's more questions. I do beg your pardon. Actually, I think I'll just talk you through this because there's not going to be time to do it. But it would have been fun if I'd have had all day. We could have done this. Right. So this is an example where we're talking about progress. Now, if you think back, the example for this, I think, might be. Do you remember the old days of levels? Kids had to make 2 sub-levels progress in a year, say. That was the expectation, whatever that meant. So let's suppose you had a test annually, at the end of one year or the start of the year, end of the next year, and you want to see whether the end of year score is 2 levels higher than the start of the year. Anybody ever do that? This kind of thing, yeah? And this is assuming that you've got a year, by the way. So this is not every 2 weeks or 6 weeks or anything stupid like that. This is a whole year. Now, obviously when you take an unreliable measure at the start and an unreliable measure at the end, the gap is really unreliable. So the analogy is like when you put your kids against the wall and put the book on their head and tell them how tall they are, and the next day they come back and say, "Have I grown?" And you do the thing again and you find they've gone down. That's not because they've shrunk. That's because the error of measurement is bigger than the change for a day. So we're in that territory. And a little bit of modelling and some statistics knowledge and a bit of algebra tells you, or would tell you if you did it, I've done it, that actually the level of reliability you need, even to be able to judge whether kids have made annual progress with a level of confidence that means they've made any progress at all. Let me try and say that slightly clearer. So supposing your measurements say they've made 2 sub-levels progress, imagine yourself in the parents' meeting or sitting down with that kid saying, well, you made 2 levels progress, but really I can only tell you that plus or minus 2. So in other words, you might have made no progress at all, or you might have made 4, and the error of measurement is such that I can't really tell you that. Now, has anyone had that conversation with a parent? Actually, okay, so to have the level of precision that would support you having even that conversation that you would just feel professionally enfeebled by, because it wouldn't sound great, you'd need reliability on both of those assessments to be, depending on assumptions you make about how much progress kids make relative to the spread and so on, somewhere in the region of 0.97. 0.97. So my question then is, what proportion of GCSE units reach that level? And the answer is not a single one. This is data from Ofqual's reliability, the reliability of GCSE units, and the highest one they found in any GCSE unit was 0.93. So my 0.97 is not attainable at GCSE. Obviously, your assessments that you use in your school, when you rate children's levels, or when you were doing that before we all became enlightened and stopped doing it, they were far, far more accurate than any GCSE, and therefore it was defensible to talk about kids making 2 levels progress, wasn't it? Well, okay. Here's another issue about hinge questions, which I should have left myself a bit more time, but the whole thing about a hinge question is, you're in the middle of a lesson, say, you're explaining a concept, or you've been explaining, perhaps you've done several lessons on this idea, and you want to know, have they got it? Have the kids got a level of mastery of this concept that allows me to move on? And so what do? Well, we ask a hinge question, and the hinge question tells you if they get it right for an individual. Let's suppose you're in a position where you can and are willing to respond differently to those who get it right from those who get it wrong. So if they get it right, you say, right, we're moving on. If you get it wrong, right, I'm going to help you and go over this again. So leave aside all the kind of pedagogical implications of how you manage that. Let's suppose you can do that, and you genuinely just want to know, should I move on or should I move back? Now, why is this about reliability? It's about reliability because the amount of information that's in a hinge question, in one question, is quite limited. You don't get, on the whole, reliable assessments from one question. You build assessments with 30 pieces of information in 30 items or whatever. So can it tell you whether you should go back or not? And again, a little bit of modelling here shows that if you, on the assumption that you know absolutely nothing about these children other than that they are, for example, of secondary age and that they're in the UK. So really you've got no prior attainment, you haven't taught them, you haven't seen them working, you just know that they're human beings, basically. Then this graph shows the difference it would make between being, have we got a pointer on this? No, okay, I'll just point. So the top line is the estimated probability that they've mastered this concept and therefore you can move on if they get the question right, and the bottom line is the probability that they've mastered it if they get that question wrong. And you can see, particularly in the middle, there's quite a big gap. But this was on the assumption that you knew nothing about those children. So let's suppose you did know something about them. Case 2 is where you've got prior attainment data. So you've got, if they're in a secondary school, say they've done a key stage test. If you're a maths teacher, you're looking at their key stage 2 maths, for example. Or you've done assessment the previous year. Then this is the level of uncertainty you'd have there. Now, even that, I think, in practice, by the time you get to the hinge question, you probably actually taught these kids something, and that means you've looked them in the eye as you explained it, and you can see the dawning understanding, hopefully, on their faces, or not. And therefore, actually, you're more likely to be something like this case, which is where you've already got a fair bit of information about whether they have understood this concept or not. And in that context, the extra information that the hinge question gives you is pretty much none. So if you look at, for example, if you wait for your hinge question until you're about 80% sure that it's time to move on, I don't know if that's a percentage you would choose, but let's say So that means you're here under 80. Can't read that, I know, because it's too blurred, but trust me, that's 80. And you read up to the graph, and if they've got the question wrong, the probability that you should move on is, I'm looking at this here, it's still about 64%. And if they get it right, it's 90-something. Oh, no, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong. Right, okay. 74 versus... Yes, 74 versus 86, or something like that. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, thank you. I'm confusing myself. So that means even if they get your hinge question wrong, you're still pretty much certain they do understand it. Because you knew that already at the point when you asked the hinge question. And there's not enough information in that hinge question to make you change your mind. If you change your mind because of the hinge question, you'll be wrong much, much more often than if you didn't ask the hinge question. Yeah, sorry about that. It's a bit puzzling. What you should do, of course, is to integrate the information from the hinge question into your prior knowledge. And of course, that is what you do. So there might be cases where a kid gets the hinge question right and you think, I'm not sure she's really got that. And so you don't move on. And so that's where your professional judgment does what the Bayesian theory says you should do, and you're okay. But what I'm modelling here is if you just took the hinge question on trust, given that prior assumption. So the key message is that there's a lot less information in just assess. Children get questions wrong even though they know the answer, and they get them right even though they don't. That's basically what assessment's about. It's a messy business. Here's another example, which I'll scoot over because I haven't got time, from, this is a direct quote from Michael Gove, much lamented. Rich, thick kids do better than poor, clever children. This was an analysis by Leon Feinstein that basically shaped the whole of New Labour's policy and continued into the coalition government. And it was essentially all a result of regression to the mean. When you assess children at 22 months, if you look at that first... I haven't got that, sorry. If I go back. The first assessment here is at 22 months. Think about a 22-month-old child and the quality of assessment that you can do of their intellectual capacity. It's not very good. It's not very reliable. In other words, you do it once and you do it 5 minutes later and, they need to go to the toilet or whatever. They won't concentrate. You won't get the same result. It's not very reliable. So if you assume, you model that reliability, what happens is that people who scored high on that test them again. They won't replicate that because it was a fluke. So don't be surprised if people who score high regress to the middle, people who score low regress up. And if there's another factor in there, which is their family background, then that you can measure that much more accurately, and although it's a smaller factor, it dominates because of the lack of precision in the attainment measure. So a whole policy was built on the importance of early intervention. I mean, it might be important anyway, but this isn't evidence for it. Okay, now I've got about 2 minutes to go through validity. So I think maybe we won't do the questions because probably haven't got time to do that. But these questions are about bias and the idea that if you compare two different modes of assessment, so objective assessment where there isn't much judgment required or any judgment required, versus teacher assessment where there's a lot of judgment required, what kind of biases come into play there? What do we know about that from the literature? Who benefits, in other words? And the answer is, well, you don't want me to tell you the answer, do you? You want to have a go? Do you want to have a go? No. You're humiliated enough. Okay, right. Well, we probably haven't got time to anyway. So EAL is advantaged by objective. Professional parents will be disadvantaged by objective because teachers, there's a kind of halo effect. They're nice, clean kids. They're well behaved. They know the rules of school, so we assume they're cleverer than they are. And when judgment comes in, they benefit from that. Chinese, British, depends what you're assessing them on. There the stereotypes kick in. If you're assessing them on maths, they benefit from teacher assessment because the stereotype is Chinese kids are good at maths. If you're assessing them on English, they're better off with the objective. And partly also because they tend to be higher attaining anyway. African Caribbean girls, again, it's the stereotypes come into play. Teacher judgment puts them down. Objective assessment, they tend to do better. High attaining pupils, generally speaking, are likely to be better on objective tests because they're more reliable, and reliability means that you get less of that regression to the mean that I was talking about earlier. Low attaining, the opposite. So they're going to be better off on teacher assessment, which is going to make them a bit more average. Challenging behaviours, again, there's a bias there, a halo effect, that you see a badly behaved child and you assume they're not as clever as they are, and the teacher assessment puts them down relative to the objective. And again, some studies interestingly show a crossover effect between the status of the teacher and the status of the child in relation to things like race. This is American studies, by the way, so they might not be the same here in our context, but they certainly do show that where the teacher and the student are not the same race, the teacher assessment tends to be lower relative to the objective assessment. And gender, some small effect there too. So it's quite complicated. You can choose how you want to be assessed according to how you're going to benefit. This is a question about your practice, which is about, if you believe in validity, are you checking any of these things? These are some of the things you might do in school. Would have been interested to hear responses to this, but I'm afraid I've run out of time, so I'm not going to have time to do that now. But maybe you could come to it at a later point. And there are lots of other ways you can do that to check validity. Okay, so why does it matter? I was just going to ask you here also for some opinions about whether you think part of validity is about the alignment between what's credited in an assessment, what gets you a high mark or a high grade, and what's actually worth teaching kids to be able to do. And if those things don't line up, one of the problems is that the assessment dominates the curriculum and we teach kids to do stuff that gets credit. Of course we do. And we also duplicate our own assessments. So if you ask teachers to create assessments, what they create is copies of the GCSE or copies of the Key Stage 2, because they think that's what an assessment should look like. So the whole thing infects the whole curriculum. And it's really, really important to get the alignment between what you think is worth teaching and learning and what is credited on an assessment. And I would have been really interested to know your opinions about how well those things you believe as a teacher are in fact aligned. Does the need to get credit on that assessment distort the kind of teaching and learning that you engage in? But I've run out of time, I'm sorry. Tried to get too much in. Sorry. I'm talking to the wrong... I'm going to shut this down because it's confusing me. That's the slide that I meant to talk to that about. These are different assessments. Yeah, sorry. I've been up since 5:30. Okay, so why does it matter? Briefly then, I know I need to stop now. Why does validity matter? Well, these biases are important. They affect real people and their outcomes, and if we don't know about them, we're not in a position to mitigate them or avoid them. Getting assessments that have both convergent and discriminant validity, in other words, it's the Goldilocks principle. Not too big, not too small. It must include everything you want to assess. So it must represent the construct, but it mustn't include things that you don't want to assess, the construct irrelevant variants. And a typical example of that is if you look at things like the old Key Stage 2 science tests, or they're not old, we still have them, don't we, but most people don't do them, there was pretty much no science in them. They were more or less a comprehension test. So you're testing reading, which is construct irrelevant, when what you want to test is understanding of scientific ideas. There's a bit of science in there, but it's dwarfed by general knowledge and reading comprehension. So that's a classic example of construct irrelevant variance. Okay, I think that's the end. So I haven't left time for questions, but I'm around, so come and find me. Thank you.